So a big thank you and welcome to those of you joining us tonight. We really look forward to updating you about the Kus-kus-sum project and about Project Watershed's work. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question, we have a whole section, a bit of time at the end where we'll be allowing as many questions as you folks may have about the project. If you have any comments along the way, feel free to pop them into the chat box. Jennifer and I will be doing our best to keep tabs on the chat box as we go through. And if we don't get to your question as you ask it in the chat box, feel free to remind us of your question again at the end in case we've missed it. So thank you and welcome to everyone. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. If your question pertains specifically to one area, I have no problem with answering questions as we go throughout. So just if you go down to the bottom bar on your Zoom screen, if you click the reactions tab, there's a little raise hand prompt on there. So if you would like to ask a question throughout in the presentation, feel free to raise your digital hand. And that goes for the end as well, and that will just help keep things organized. Having said that, if you want to just unmute yourself at the end and ask a question, that works pretty well too. So thank you and welcome. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen here. Perfect. So before we get fully started, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce myself. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Caitlin Pierzchalski, and I'm the Executive Director of Project Watershed. It's been my honor to work with the lovely folks at Project Watershed and in this beautiful community for just a little bit more than a year now. So I started last February, and it's been a very, very busy year. And it's been an honor to meet so many of you and to work within the community. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to my lovely co-host tonight, Jennifer Sutherst, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jennifer Sutherst. I'm the Senior Staff Biologist for Project Watershed. I've been with the Society since 2014. I specialize in coastal restoration, and I've been overseeing a lot of the work at the Kus-kus-sum project.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So as everyone here knows, hopefully, this work will be undertaken on the traditional and unceded territory of the Comox and Pentlatch people. We are very happy and proud to live within their territory and to work in partnership with them on this project. So on this map here, you can see the traditional territory, the statement of intent for the Comox First Nation. And the site in question, the Kus-kus-sum site, is named after a village site that used to be just across the river of the current site. And that was a village of the Comox people. The current site, which you can see these days, is a big old 8.3 acre gravel swath just up from Hollyhock Flats, just in the mouth of the Comox estuary. The current site, before it was developed as a sawmill, was a Sitka spruce grove and a tidal marsh, very similar to what you see at Hollyhock Flats today. So this area was an abundant area. It was used for many cultural purposes, and including as a tree burial site as well. I'm just going to let in a couple of new participants, so hold on a second here. I just want to make sure. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, just so I can make sure that I've added everyone to make sure that everyone's here. Perfect. I may need to pause throughout as there was a little bit of confusion about the timing. So I just want to make sure that everyone is admitted before we go any further.
Caitlin, because I'm co-host, I could admit people too. So if you want me just to track that while you're chatting away, I can do that for you.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
So as I was saying, the site before it was developed as the sawmill site that you know today was a very culturally important site to the people, the Comox and Pentlatch people. It was used for many purposes, and we'll be developing a little bit more communication later about what those purposes are. So stay posted for that, because we will be sending out a little bit more information, some communications that we're going to be developing in collaboration with the Comox First Nation. So some of the first kind of notation that we have found, at least of the site, you can see it actually up here. So the current site, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the current site is kind of lots 11 and 10 and 9 here. And you can actually see the traditional village Kus-kus-sum on the other side of the river over here. So this was a surveyor's map from the 1890s, which is pretty cool. And what you can see here on the right-hand side, this is just a traditional Comox village site. This isn't actually at Kus-kus-sum. I think it's on the other side of the river. But I just wanted to show you folks an example of what living situations may have looked like before. So this is some of the earliest good imagery we have of the site. So this is an aerial view from 1931, and you can see the Kus-kus-sum site outlined here in red. You can also see some of the waterways that we've delineated in blue as well to give a good understanding of what the site looked pre-development. So this is one of the only images that we actually have of the site pre-development. So I just wanted to show it to you folks because you can see the extensive vegetation kind of shown in black here, as well as some of the traditional channel networks that would have been on the site before its development. So the site was developed as a sawmill in the 1950s. It went through a lot of different development iterations. As you can imagine, it ran for a sawmill for about 60 years, a little bit under 60 years. So that's a long time for something to be used industrially. So of course, it has changed much over time. This is on the left here, you can see the site when it was actually back at river level, which is pretty interesting. So this is before the steel piling wall went in, of course, and the site was kind of raised up above river level. So this would have been back at river level. So here you are on the, what would maybe now be the river walkway looking across the river at the Kus-kus-sum site here. And this is another image where you can see the vegetation, the 17th Street, where the 17th Street Bridge would be now. Obviously, it's not there yet. And then looking down into the Hollyhock Marsh Conservation Area here. The site obviously had a lot of infrastructure that was built up onto it over time. You can see in the photo here, that old iconic mill infrastructure that many of you who grew up in British Columbia maybe know and recognize. And then here, the photo is just before it was shut down. So you can see the log booms out front. You can see the large mill infrastructure on the left here, some of the logs sorting and storage. And then this, of course, here is Hollyhock Flats Conservation Area. So when the mill was shut down in 2004, it then underwent an extensive testing and remediation process in 2008 and 2009 before it was put up for sale in 2011. And then it sat on the market for a little while before anyone purchased it. And so at that point, you know, after seeing the site sitting for a while, that was kind of when Project Watershed started reaching out to the community, engaging with the community, and engaging with KFN as well as the city of Courtenay to see what the interest was in a conservation or restoration solution for the site. So we undertook that process. It was an extensive process. It was started in 2016. With a community forum about the estuary. And that's when we really started to get buy-in for this project, for this idea. And we really started engaging really actively with our now partners, the Comox First Nation and the city of Courtenay. So we started the process of buying the land back in 2018. It took us a couple years to raise the funds. And then Interfor agreed to hold the property for us while we fundraised, which was very generous of them. And then, of course, we finally successfully raised the full 3.2 million in December of 2020. And then the land was fully transferred last year in February of 2021. So Project Watershed has acquired the land in trust for our two beneficiaries, the Comox First Nation and the City of Courtenay. And once restoration is complete, the land will be fully rematriated to the Comox First Nation. So this has been a community project from the get-go. So I like to ask this question for two folks. So feel free to type an answer in the chat. And what I would like to know is, what does Kus-kus-um and the Kus-kus-um project mean to you? Feel free to type it in the chat. You can take a moment to think about it. I feel like so many people that I've spoken with have a different appreciation for this project and what this space has meant for them. You know, some folks have worked at the sawmill. That was a part of like their livelihood, which is super important. You know, it was a super important perspective place for the whole community for that reason. And now we're coming together as a community to find a different solution for the site. So feel free to pop into the chat. I see lots of good answers already, so thank you so much. A plus for the global community, restoration, community. Thank you so much for your answers, folks. A returning of the land, rematriated, return an industrial site to nature and wildlife. Beautiful. So it means a lot to us too, both to myself and Jennifer, and of course the wider Project Watershed community. So we really appreciate learning from you folks and learning what it means to you as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and she's going to start taking you through the project goals, as well as what we have achieved so far and what we're looking to do this year.
And Caitlin, we have had people slowly trickling in, so maybe just keep an eye on that waiting room, because I imagine we'll have some more attendees joining us as well.
Great, will do.
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly talk about the restoration and ecological goals for the site. So our overarching vision from the beginning has been to return this sort of derelict, decommissioned industrial site into functioning habitat for fish and wildlife, which will also have a lot of benefits for the community. It will change the site aesthetically, make it look more pleasing, allow other opportunities for recreation and people to engage with the site. And as well as part of the restoration design, we've built in a little bit of flood attenuation. So there's adaptation here for climate change as well. So it's really a fantastic project from that perspective. What we'll be doing on the site to achieve this is majorly regrading and recontouring the site to support the tidal elevations that will support tidal marshes, as well as upper elevations that will support forested riparian areas. So eventually we will be taking out the sheet piling alongside the river and reconnecting the site to the Courtenay River. And one of the other things we'd eventually like to do as well is to connect the site through to Hollyhock Marsh. In that aerial photo from 1931 that Caitlin showed previously, you'll see that there was a channel that used to historically connect from Hollyhock Marsh all the way to the Kus-kus-sum site. Unfortunately, there is something in our way though, and that's the main sewage line that goes underneath the river from West Courtenay over to East Courtenay. So we do have to cross that sewage line in order to connect the two sites back together. And that, when we looked at it, just wasn't feasible. There was a lot of expense that would have incurred, as you can imagine. It was going to be about $250,000 it added to the project at that time to cross over the sewer line. And also we found that the elevation that the pipe was at when we did cross over, basically the two sites were only going to be connected at the very highest of tides. So that meant that we weren't getting a lot of habitat gain compared to the amount of expense we were going to incur and the amount of risk that we were taking on as well, because you can imagine if anything happened to that sewage line, it would not be good. Next slide, please. So basically that's not feasible at this point, but hopefully at some point in the future, if they do upgrade that sewage connection, that might be an opportunity at that time for us to connect the two sites together. So the restoration from the beginning has been planned in 3 distinct phases. The first phase was the hard surface removal, and that occurred last year. So as soon as that title transferred, we actually started restoration on the site. The first thing that you as a community member might have noticed is that we took down the old building that was on the site, the old office building that was on the site, which was decommissioned, and we took that down, and it was actually a condemned building as well. And as part of that work, we recycled as much as we could out of that building. And then we started last year with the hard surface removal of the concrete and the asphalt that was at the site. We also took out some of the underground utilities as well. So this year, what we're planning on is the major earthworks at the site. So that will be the regrading, the creating of the natural habitat areas at the site. So that'll be a huge amount of work this year. And then finally, the third year will be a lot of planting and habitat complexing work, and then reconnecting to the river. The last piece of work that we'll be doing is taking out the steel sheet piling alongside the site adjacent to the river and connecting the site back to the Courtenay River. Because right now, that steel sheet piling is actually beneficial to the project because it allows us to do all the work on the terrestrial upland side, and it basically acts as a sediment barrier between us and the river. Next slide. So this is the restoration design, the detailed restoration prescription that was developed by the project engineers, Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, for the site. So the site will be, when we have a full tides and flood levels, about half of the site will be underwater, except for an area to the very south of the site that is actually a salt marsh island feature that we're building into the restoration design. So that will have a raised elevation, it'll have trees on it, and there'll actually be a deep pond at the south of the site. One of the limiting things that we have on the river is the lack of deep water refuge for fish. So we wanted to make sure to incorporate that into the project design. We're going to have various elevations that will support various plant species on the site. And there's going to be lots of little complex intertidal channels within the site that will provide refuge for fish, especially during high flows. Next slide. So this is some modeling that Northwest Hydraulic Consultants also did for us, and it shows what the restoration design, how it's going to basically react under a variety of different river flow heights as well as flood conditions. And this was a really important thing to do when we were seeking funding for the project moving forward for the restoration. A lot of the potential funding agencies wanted to understand the design better and understand, you know, once design was completed, what would that look like? And so you can see as on the curve on the bottom right, as we get that red dot going up to a peak, a low point, and this is basically the different water levels with the tides. You'll see that the site will flow in with more water, of course, with the high tides, and then less water as the tide goes out. But as you can see, about 50% of the site will be underwater during those high tide levels. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see with the river flows, you see what happens when we get our lower discharges and then our peak discharges, and you can see how the site reacts. And so basically where you have red, orange areas, that's where you get the deeper water. And then as it shallows out, it gets lighter blue. So what this does is it provides a variety of different wetted habitat areas for a variety of species. And it also, I think, just ensures that people understand what the site's going to look like when it's finished. So it's really nice to have this visual interpretation of the restoration design. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, we did the hard surface removal last year. So that was a huge piece of work that got done. We had a crusher on site as well to crush the concrete. So one of the really important things for Project Watershed being an environmental stewardship society is that it's important for us in terms of sustainability to reuse, recycle, and repurpose as many of the materials coming off the site as possible. So what we did is we broke up the concrete into large chunks, and then we actually crushed it all into a 3-inch minus product. And that's a product that can be used. It was certified by a local engineer here, Luke, which engineers, I just wanted to give a shout out to them because they actually did the work for us pro bono in support of the project, which was lovely. So they came on and certified that it was 3-inch minus structural fill, and that can be used in development projects. It can be used as a base for road building, that kind of thing. So that meant that we were able to reuse that piece of material that was developed through the project throughout the valley. And so it was close to 12,000 cubic meters of crushed concrete that came off the site. It was about 750 double truckloads that came off the site and were repurposed throughout the valley. The same thing, all the steel rebar that came out of the concrete. So there was a huge amount of rebar mesh that was in this concrete, and all the metal that came out of it was also recycled. And as well, the asphalt that was broken up, we separated it out, and that was basically taken to local paving companies, 2 different paving companies, and they used it for repurposing as road surfacing. So they melt it down and mix it up with some gravel, and they use it, it forms a product called RAP that can be used for resurfacing roads. We also took out all the underground utilities last year, so all the electrical conduits and plumbing. And again, we recycled as much of that as possible. So all the electrical wires, the aluminum, the copper, those were recycled. And as well, the PVC piping actually got recycled by local people for various local drainage projects, but also the Cumberland Mountain Biking Society ended up using a lot of that PVC piping for drainage for their mountain biking trails. And as well, we did a little bit of an initial planting last year, and the next slide shows that in more detail. Next slide. Yeah, so we did a little bit of planting at the north end of the site this past spring. So that's right adjacent to the 17th Street Bridge. We had great support from the Ministry of Transportation Highways for that as well. They have a right-of-way right beside the project and the bridge, and they allowed us to work on their right-of-way to remove invasive species, blackberry and broom, and then actually to replant that area with some native species so that we had a little bit of a larger habitat gain. And so it was an area that was just over about 1,200 meters that we squared that we planted with 400 different species based on a vegetation prescription that was done for us by a local consultant, Corolla Environmental Consulting. And so there is 400 native plants that were put in a few days with about, or actually just a couple days with over 30 volunteers. One of the things about the project is it's had a high level of community engagement, which is wonderful. And there's been lots of people asking us, how can they help? They want to get, on the site and really connect with it in that very physical way. And unfortunately, for the first part of the project with that concrete removal, it was just a lot of big machinery and there wasn't that opportunity. So it was wonderful to have people on the site this spring able to engage in a really hands-on way with the project. And yeah, it's wonderful to have all that volunteer support. One of the things that we did that you might notice is the soil's very rough and loose. And then we actually put in a lot of large woody debris, and the large woody debris creates micro habitats, believe it or not, microclimates on the site, but it also decomposes over the time and adds organics to the site as well. We did haul in topsoil for this and compost, and then we had a couple local companies provide us with mulch for the plants, Chinook Forest Products and Above and Beyond. No, it wasn't Above and Beyond Tree Service. Caitlin, what was the tree company, the arborist that donated the?
I think it was just called Tree Care, wasn't it?
Is it Grow Tree Care? Grow Tree
Care.
Care. Yeah, I just want to make sure I get that right. So yeah, Grow Tree Care also provided some mulch for us for the plantings as well. So really nice to get that support. And the plants are doing fantastic at the site. All this spring rain has definitely helped. And we've had 98% survival so far, which is lovely to see. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this year will be the major earthworks at the site. So that's going to be a lot of surveying that needs to be done in order to regrade the site to very specific elevations as per our restoration design. So at the bottom of the slide, you can just see one of the cross sections from our restoration design. And it's a little bit hard to read, but that blue line actually represents the water level that will be flooding into the site when we have high tides and high flows in the river. And yeah, thanks, Caitlin, for putting the arrow on there. And at the lowest elevation, you can actually see that will be the natural shoreline, and it'll be underwater pretty much all the time. So that'll be connecting to the riverbed. And then as we go up, we're going to have a large salt marsh bench. And we tried to prioritize the amount of salt marsh habitat that we have on the site because it's incredibly valuable habitat for juvenile salmonids, in particular a species called Carex lingbii, which is a salt marsh sedge that we'll be planting heavily in this area. And it provides a lot of cover for fish, but it also provides a lot of insect drop. There's a lot of insects that live on it. They drop into the river and then the fish can feed on them. So it provides food for the fish. And then we'll sort of slope up gently to some shrubby areas upland. And then eventually the highest elevations will support our conifer trees. So that's going to be about 2 meters above the current grade that we're going to build up. And that highest area will be built up right along the edge of Comox Road. And throughout the process, we're going to be having archaeological and environmental monitoring of all the work that we do on site by third parties. Okay, next slide. So soils management is going to be a really important piece of the next phase as we go through. So we've been working with Terra West Environmental, a local consultant out of Nanaimo, on developing a soil management plan for us, and they just finished that plan for us. They've been doing a whole bunch of pit testing on the site and looking at the soils for any contaminants there. The site was fully remediated in 2008, 2009 before Interfor put it up for sale. But part of our due diligence was going back and ensuring that it was a clean site and that it was compliant with the current standards of the day. So in 2017, the province updated all the standards in terms of contaminated sites and the thresholds for various contaminants. So we have to meet not that 2009 standard, but the current standard of the day. And we have to ensure that the site is at the highest standard actually in terms of contaminants, because it's not going to be used for industrial use in the future. It's not going to be used for residential purposes. It's going to be used for fish and wildlife. And because we're reverting it to wildlands, we have to meet the very highest standards. Okay, so next. So the soil management plan that was produced by Terra West Environmental did come up with 3 areas of environmental concern. And that's not surprising given the past industrial nature of the site. I think what was surprising for us though was that arsenic was the most prominent contaminant that we found on the site. Now, arsenic is something that's naturally can be found within marine sediments. And arsenic, interestingly, wasn't anything that any of the historical information says that was ever used on the site. So we think that actually what we're dealing with here is a naturally elevated arsenic level that's naturally occurring as a background level, but it's not something that the province basically doesn't have the data for our area about what the natural background level is. So it's something that we still have to deal with. If we're shipping any of the soil off the site and it's high in arsenic, then we still have to meet that threshold. And in 2017, the threshold was lowered. The tolerance was lowered from, I think it was 20 milligrams per kilogram to now it's down to 10 milligrams per kilogram. So they've lowered the tolerance quite a bit for arsenic. So now we have to meet that. The good news, though, is that the arsenic is really found within the clay layer on the site, and it's not migrating into any ground or surface water. So that's really good news. And so we'll make sure that any of that soil that is removed off the site goes to the appropriate disposal facilities. Area 1 also had a little bit of hydrocarbons and toluene as well. Within that area. So we'll be treating those appropriately as well. And area 2, as well as the arsenic, had a little bit of heavy metal contamination, some zinc and copper. And then area 3 just had arsenic in it. So any of the soil that only has arsenic in it, if we leave it on site, because that's a naturally elevated background level, we're pretty sure we don't have to treat it. But anything that does move off-site that has contaminants in it will either go to Nanaimo to a facility there, or it will go to Campbell River to a facility there. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but depending on our waste removal permits, it'll go to one of those 2 locations to be dealt with appropriately. Next. So additional testing is going to begin this week to fully quantify the areas within the site that are clean. So we have a whole bunch of areas in the site that are clean. There were 12 excavations that were done before Interfor put the site up for sale. And they basically put in clean fill from the Cumberland gravel and sand pit. So we know those areas are clean. So what we're doing is we're carefully delineating those areas that have all the clean soil in them. And we're going to prioritize the clean soil for removal off-site first, because it can be disposed of locally. It doesn't have to go to Nanaimo or Campbell River, and that will save money on the project overall. All right, next. So yeah, as I mentioned, the regrading and recontouring will be the bulk of our work this year. It's going to be a lot of survey work. We've been working with a local survey company, Bazette, on doing the elevations for us, and they've already done some work on the site now. So we'll be having to figure out all the grades and excavating down to the appropriate level along the site. We're going to be working from the north end of the site south. So we're going to phase it in stages. And we're going to be working within the bylaw hours for noise. So we're going to be starting no earlier than 7:30 in the morning and working, I think, till about 5:30 at night. The project will not nearly be as noisy as it was last year. Last year, we had a lot of the hammering going on because we were breaking the concrete, and that was a very noisy process, as was the crushing of the concrete. But this year, it'll just be a lot of earth moving with the excavators. So there will be some noise, but it shouldn't be as much of an issue as it was last year. Next. So also this year in the fall, we'll be starting with some native plantings at the site. So the first area that we get done, we'll be planting with the salt marsh species as well as some upper terrestrial species. So we have a wide variety of species that will go into the site. As I mentioned, we have a full planting plan that's been done for the entire restoration design, and it was based on hollyhock marsh. So we're very fortunate to have a conservation area to the south of the site, a natural area, hollyhock marsh, and we went through that area and surveyed it and figured out all the different plant communities that were growing at different elevations and the species within those plant communities. And then based on that, we used that as our template for our planting prescription. We came up with a detailed planting prescription for the site. And really exciting as well as we've got some participation from the Comox First Nation and from some of their elders to let us know the culturally significant species for them, and then making sure that we incorporate those species into our planting plan if they aren't already, or incorporating more numbers of those high valued species for them. And as well, one of the big pieces of work that we'll have to do is we'll have to continually monitor the site as part of our monitoring of the project success to ensure that we don't have recolonization by invasive species such as broom or blackberry or reed canary grass, which is a real issue in some of the lower salt marsh areas and is actually a little bit of an issue in hollyhock as well. Next. Yeah, so the full revegetation of the site will be in year 3. So we'll do some more planting in the spring. So fall of this year and then spring of next year we'll be planting. Next year we also will be doing some more habitat complexing work. So we'll be adding some in-stream features like large woody debris and boulder complexes. We'll also be doing some features like amphibian ponds, bird nesting boxes, bat boxes. So a lot of different things will be going on then. And then the final stage of the project will be the removal of the sheet piling wall. So we'll have a barge come up the river to do that with a crane on it, and it will vibrate out the pieces of steel sheet piling, and those pieces of sheet piling will be recycled as well. Next. Oh, that's funding. So I'll pass it back to Caitlin to chat about the funding for the project moving forward.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So we've been working very hard to do our fundraising, and we would like to give a big shout out to the community here today because many of you have contributed to the funding for this project, along with many businesses and other community donors within the Comox Valley. So that's been a portion of the funding that we've raised, and then a lot of the other funds that have supported the restoration have been through various granting agencies, whether they're government agencies or they're other nonprofits. So the total estimated budget for the project is about 5.2 million. So far, we have successfully secured $3.4 million, which seems very incredible, and we're super grateful to be able to raise that kind of money. So we spent out a lot of that in the first year, and then we'll be spending out the other half, or a little bit less than the other half we've secured this year. So we'd like to give a big shout out to some of our funders. So you can see those here in the year 1, 2, and 3. That just covers some of the funders. So because they're all lovely acronyms, I will say them out loud. So in year 1, we were supported by the VC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, along with the Healthy Watersheds Initiative. We also got support for the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, the Habitat Compensation Trust Fund, Pacific Salmon Foundation, as well as WWWF. That was too many W's, just 2 W's and then an F. Anyways, so then in year 2, many of the same funders as well. We also got a new funder on board, called AFSAR, which is the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk. So we're super grateful to partnership with the Comox First Nation, which allows us access to funding sources like these. I'd also love to give a big shout out to the Mi'kmaq Legacy Fund, which is contributing a huge amount of money that will support a lot of the plants that are going to be planted on the site this year. And then similar funders for the following years. Obviously, we're still working really, really hard to close that $2 million gap there. Anything that isn't able to be completed this year, we'll just push into next year. So far, we're still looking like we're going to be on target as far as the timing of the project. So we'll just keep working hard to secure more funding so that you folks can see this project progress. So one of the things that Jennifer mentioned already, but I'll just describe a little bit more for folks, is that we will have a ton of volunteer engagement opportunities this year. A lot of that will be through the planting of the site. So as Jennifer mentioned earlier, all of those 400 plants were planted by about 30 folks that came out earlier this spring to help us out. And we will be planting so many more plants than just 400. Especially this year. And a lot of that work will be happening kind of end of September, October, and maybe a bit into November, depending on the weather. So if getting out on the site and helping to plant the site is something that you may be interested in, please go to our website. You can go to projectwatershed.ca/volunteer/ and fill out our volunteer application form. If you're already on our email list, that's great. Those volunteer opportunities will come straight to your inbox. So just keep an eye out on your emails and be sure to check your junk every once in a while. I've noticed sometimes our automatically generated emails end up in there. So if that is the case, go check out your junk and you can report that not as junk and then they'll come straight to your regular inbox. We'll also be advertising these opportunities through our website, our social media, and through our newsletter. If you're not already subscribing to the newsletter, feel free to do so. You can do that at projectwatershed.ca/contact/. So if you want to come out, please do so. There's almost nothing in this world that brings me more joy than planting plants with you folks. So please come out. I would love to meet you and thank you all personally for allowing us to do this beautiful piece of work. We'll bring all the snacks, the tools, and the expertise that you may need to learn how to plant a site like this. All you need to do is bring yourself and your enthusiasm for restoration and for bringing our estuary back to life. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. I would love to answer all of your questions here with my colleague, Jennifer. So please feel free to unmute yourself or put up your hand and ask us any questions you might have about year 2 works or things that you've been seeing that you have questions about.
Yeah.
So this is where we're talking about in here.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to do in a large part is make those ephemeral streams, etc.
Yeah, this is more hollyhock marsh there. Yeah.
Great. So does anybody have any questions?
I think we're done here.
All right, Helen, I see you have a question.
Oh, hi, thank you. Yes, I'm just wondering about, you say, I missed the early part of the meeting, but Hollyhock Flats, that's the forested area to the south, I guess, over there? That's, okay. And is that where the Eagle's Nest is? My first question. And the second question is, what type of house is that on that pole there? There's
so that is, there is an eagle's nest just within the Hollyhock Flats. So it's kind of a little bit past the boundary of our site in Hollyhock Flats. So that's where it is. And then the little, do you mean the owl box on the big pole?
Oh, is that what that is? Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
So when there was the old office building on the site, we had been monitoring a barn owl nest that had been in there. At one point, someone had broken into the office building and I think disturbed the nest. And so the barn owls had left before we ended up demolishing the building. So we'd been watching closely at that, but the owl had been disturbed at a certain point and never came back. And we had watched that for about a year to make sure that that was the case before we took down the building. So just in case the owl decided to come back, we wanted to have a home for it to go to. So that's why we put up that barn owl box, and we may be putting up some other habitat boxes as well for things like swallows or bats. We haven't come up with the full plan of exactly what that will look like, but maybe we'll investigate some of that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for your question, Helen. All right. Oh, so I did have a question here. The budget that I just quoted for the project does not include the amount that we raised for the actual land acquisition. So we raised $3.2 million for the land acquisition and have since that point raised an additional $3.4 million. So it's quite an incredible amount of money. And I think one of the greatest parts that I've really recognized about this project is us raising that money. You know, that money is going into our community. So we're paying local contractors, you know, you're paying local people to do work that's maybe a little bit different than they would be doing normally. So it's been a really, really cool way to see some economic benefit to our community, as well as, of course, the ecological and cultural benefit of a project like this. All right.
Betty Donaldson has a question, it looks like.
All right, Betty, go ahead.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I live just across the estuary, and tonight's presentation is rightfully focused on Kus-kus-sum itself, but I'm wondering what research or studies have been done to look at the impact on the other side of the estuary, the shoreline. I noticed the lagoon seems to be filling in. How are we going to expand our vision to include both sides once the water flow changes?
Yeah, that's a great question, Betty. So one of the things that Jennifer and I have spoken about a lot is we've seen the fringing marsh that's on the riverside walk side of the river. We've seen a lot of erosion of that fringing marsh, which concerns us both. And so one of our hopes is actually that by removing that steel piling wall, we'll actually see a little bit less of the erosive force of the river pushed over to the riverside walkway side. So we're actually hoping that the restoration at Kus-kus-sum may actually support that fringing marsh and its ability to grow back a little bit. And then maybe as far as the lagoon questions go, I'll just flip it over to you, Jennifer, for anything additional you'd like to include.
Yeah, for sure. So Betty, that is a good point you've brought up, and it's a big issue to deal with. So you're right, the lagoon is starting to fill in. The Courtney River itself is starting to shallow out as well. And what we're seeing, that's just due to upper watershed logging and movement of bed material down from the upper watersheds and through down to the Courtney River. So over time, yeah, it's definitely shallowing out and filling in some areas, and we're losing deep water habitat, which is really important refuge for fish, as you can imagine, especially with climate change. And it's a big question that a lot of different watershed groups and streamkeeper groups are trying to address. So this isn't the only system that's seeing these impacts. There's lots of these watersheds along Vancouver Island that are seeing similar impacts. So we're getting this bed load material moving down, and then it's like, what do you do about it? How do we maintain it in place? So for example, Solemn River Restoration Society has been working on doing a whole bunch of major willow staking along gravel bars. And the idea behind that is that the way that they're putting the willows in, that they'll basically trap gravel and prevent it from moving further down the system. And we may have to look at similar projects on the Puntledge River, maybe on the Browns River as well. It's definitely an ongoing issue that we're seeing.
Thank you very much. And then a second part to my question. You emphasize salmon, and I understand the importance of salmon in the cycle. But one of the wonderful aspects of being in an estuary is the biodiversity. And there are many birds. For example, the glaucous winged gull population is declining, and it feeds along here. So there are migrating birds as well. There are songbirds, and all of this is changing, and I know that there's only so much we can do, but those images you show us of the past are such important markers. I just hope that the Naturalist Society or some spin-off can take a look at the state of our estuary as it is now. When you move into the replanting and the restoration and the better water flow, and then be able to look at it in 5 years after, say, 23 is completed. Like I think some markers along the way to show the other species as well as salmon is really important in understanding biodiversity of an estuary.
That's
Yeah,
a
we're
great point.
definitely.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead, Jennifer.
sorry. Well, I was just going to say we're definitely doing that for the Kus-kus-sum project. We have a really detailed monitoring plan that we've developed, and so we'll be monitoring the success of the project, you know, sort of for quite a long time afterwards, at least 10 years, if not more. And so what part of that monitoring plan does is it looks at vegetation success, but it also looks at the birds that utilize the area. It also looks at pinniped usage of the area and how that changes over time, because one of the issues we've had along the river and along the site here is seal and sea lion predation of migratory salmon and other fish as well. So yeah, so there's a lot of different things that we're monitoring as part of that. We're monitoring carbon sequestration as well over the long term of the site. So we're definitely looking at a lot of those different features. I hear you. We're going to be looking at aquatic insect diversity within the riparian channels that we create. So yeah, so we have the big picture in mind. I think sometimes we focus a little bit, we can be a little bit salmon centric because a lot of our funding comes from organizations that want to see more fish. But we definitely have that larger biodiversity picture in mind when we determine what is a successful restoration, and in particular for this site.
Thank
That's
you on
great.
behalf of Mama Earth.
You're welcome.
The other thing that I'll just add to build off of Jennifer's answer as well is that monitoring plan will look at both Kus-kus-sum as well as at Hollyhock Flats for a lot of those different parameters. So we'll actually be looking to Hollyhock Flats as kind of our end goal and comparing the values that we see at Kus-kus-sum with those that we see at Hollyhock Flats for many of the different parameters that Jennifer mentioned. And I believe, Helen, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks again. I was just wondering what Betty was referring to, the lagoon. So what part of the river is considered the lagoon?
That's the Air Park Lagoon, where the marina is and the Courtney airstrip. So Kus-kus-sum is on the left bank of the Courtney River, and the Air Park Lagoon is on the right bank at the mouth of the river.
Okay, I see, right. Okay, thank you.
And I got a great question here from Heather Pittman. Thank you for joining us in the chat. Will the recording of this forum be sent to us for sharing with friends and family? Absolutely. It will be sent to those that are signed up on the email list. And we're also going to be putting it up on our website as well. So that will probably happen within probably early next week. We'll send that out to folks for sharing and viewing, and we're hoping that this can be a resource. So if you have any questions from folks, I don't know, I feel like a lot of the folks that are often out walking the river walkway get a lot of questions. So if that is the case, please feel free to flip them this recording and let them know that these resources are available. And if anyone ever has any questions about what's going on at Kus-kus-sum, Jennifer and I are so happy to chat with you folks. We're so happy to engage with the community because this truly has been a community project. So if you ever have any questions about what's happening at Kus-kus-sum, you can reach out to us at info@projectwatershed.ca.
Will has a question there. Go ahead, Will.
Hi there, thanks. This is not so much a question as a comment. I just wanted to say that I've had the opportunity through working with climate organizations to talk about Kus-kus-sum with a number of folks from across Canada. And I'd say like the reaction is universally one of just people are overjoyed, and I think the idea that this unusual relationship between a municipality, a First Nation, and a watershed group is, I think, anyway, it's been inspiring. And I don't know if it's actually sort of borne fruit in other communities, but of all the climate stories or sort of restoration stories that touch on climate that are out there, this is something which strikes people's imagination every time I mention it. So just thank you so much for the work you're doing. And it's fantastic to hear about the developments that are coming for the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind comments. Well, yeah, one of the things that Don Castleton, who I believe is on this call, this webinar rather, has always mentioned is that we should be really documenting the history of this project and how it's come together as something that can be used as a template by other organizations and people that want to do similar things in their community. And it's something I think that, just being a nonprofit stewardship organization, sometimes it's hard to find the capacity for that, but it is something that I think we do, our group needs to do as our partnership with the KFN and city. It's something we probably should all sit down to do sooner rather than later, is document how this has all come to being.
Great. I did have a question in the chat here just asking me to remind everyone again how you sign up to volunteer. So you can go to our website. Ooh, actually, I have a better idea. I'm going to go to our website right now. Please don't look at how I fix my waiters that have a hole in it. But if you go to our website, projectwatershed.ca. Oh, can you guys see it? I might be only sharing my, hold on, I'm going to share my whole screen here. All right, so you go to our website. This is just our homepage, projectwatershed.ca. And then you scroll down and there's a button here that says volunteer. So if you click volunteer, and you scroll down, you can fill out our volunteer application form. And once you go there, you sign up, and then you can kind of say what kind of work you're interested in, any expertise you may have, and then tell us that you're not a robot, press submit. And then that way you'll be on our volunteer list and we'll email all of these opportunities directly to you. Great, I'm just gonna flip it back here. Okay, and I see there's another comment. Oh, thank you. Is that you, Virginia? Hooking us up in the chat. Virginia, a team member on the Project Watershed team, is helping us out with a little answers here. Great, thank you, Virginia. Does anybody else, I don't see any hands up. Can I get some, oh, that's a great idea, Betty. Maybe those are direct messages to me, but there was just a comment from Betty about doing a workshop about the past and history from our past volunteers and folks that have been engaged with us in the past about how this project came about. And I think that's a really lovely idea. I always love learning stories about folks that have been engaged with Project Watershed for a long time. It's always beautiful and lovely to hear their stories. Great. Any more questions or comments?
Oh, right there.
All right, no more questions?
Did you want to play the transformation video there, maybe just to finish off then,
Yeah,
Caitlin,
sure.
if there's no more questions?
It's just our little year one recap. So I hope folks can hear it, see it okay, but this is just a recap of some of the action that happened last year. We got some concrete breaking. Those are some test pits that we're digging. That's moving some of the concrete. There you can see just so much concrete that we pulled up last year and a little bit of asphalt as well. Just a reminder that we are always looking for funding. So if you know of any folks that are looking to support the project, definitely connect them with us and we'd be happy to chat with them. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, I suppose that if no one else has any questions, we can always leave it there. Just a reminder for folks that we have recorded this session. We'll be sending out the recording to everyone. We're happy to share it, and we're happy to have you share it with any of your colleagues, friends, or folks in the community that might be interested. Shout out to my wonderful colleague, Jennifer, who this project has been her baby for so many years, and it's always so beautiful to learn from her about all the things.
And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight.
And a big double shout out to this community for making this very ambitious project possible. We truly would not be here without all of you. So thank you so much for supporting this vision, for making this possible, for all of your contributions. I'm just every day so baffled that we're here today being able to do this project. So thank you so much, everyone. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your thank yous. We very much look forward to seeing you again soon. Give us a shout. We'd love to plant some plants with you in the fall.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.